Welcome to the Boswell Virtual Event Series. It is day 4,395 of us being in business, and we are honored to be one of the stores hosting the virtual Edgar Award finalist readings. Our category is potpourri. No, it's not. It's the G.P. Putnam Sons Sue Grafton Memorial Award for novels with a female protagonist. And tonight we have 5 authors with us and one on tape because I hope she's sleeping right now. So if she has insomnia, maybe she'll join us a little later. Kathleen Kent, author of The Burn, Laurie R. King, author of Riviera Gold, Rosalie Knecht, I hope I said that right. Is the K pronounced? Author of Vera Kelly is Not a Mystery, Sara, Paretsky, author of Deadland, Ilaria, Tuti, author of The Sleeping Nymph, and James Ziskin, author of Turn to Stone. This is all part of the lead up to the Edgar Awards ceremony on April 29th at 1 p.m. Our first author tonight is Kathleen Kent, who I have to welcome back to Boswell because she actually appeared with Hannah Kent for one of her historical novels before she took a genre turn, so to speak. Kathleen Kent is the New York Times bestselling author and 2 times Edgar Award nominee for her contemporary crime novels, The Dime and The Burn. The 3rd Detective Betty book, the title The Pledge, will be released on November 2021. Kent is also the author of 3 historical novels, and in March 2020, she was inducted into the Texas Institute of Letters for her contribution to Texas literature. Thank you so much for coming. We're all going to disappear now.
Thank you so much. I am so thrilled to be nominated along with my stellar panel mates for the Sue Grafton Memorial Award. Before I get started, I wanted to thank Daniel Golden and Boswell Books for hosting the panel, Kathy Daneman, Marjorie Flax, and the Edgar Award nominating committee for all their time and dedication in the daunting task of making the award selections. My novel, The Burn, is the 2nd book in the Detective Betty Rizek series and chronicles Detective Betty and her struggles to overcome the physical and emotional scars she endured after being kidnapped by a meth dealing cult, which is of course in Texas. I'll be reading a short selection from chapter 2 in The Burn. Monday, December 30th, 2013, Dallas, Texas. This I've come to know. Avoiding uncomfortable truths about oneself is like putting a threadbare mattress over a hard, stony ground. No matter which way you turn, it's going to hurt. Might as well quit stalling and get busy clearing the field. Yet here I am in a ramshackle dive, face down on a hard bench, submitting myself to a man holding an implement of torture, in this case, a tattooing gun. The awkward position causes my right leg to cramp, the leg with the ruptured Achilles tendon, the shredded fibers sewn together with medical sutures strong enough to hold up a suspension bridge. The calf muscle twitches more painfully, and I flex the toes carefully upward to forestall a massive spasm. It's been 3 months since the reparative surgery and an agonizingly slow recovery and rehab. 3 months and change since a narrow plastic-coated cable was threaded through an incision in my ankle, forced beneath the major tendon and passed through to the opposite side. The ends of the cable had been fastened together and attached to a heavy chain, the far end of which was anchored to a large stone upon which my captors had painted Submit E521. The E is for Ephesians, the number indicating the biblical chapter and verse, submit yourselves one another to the fear of God. Closing my eyes, I can still hear Evangeline, my captor's voice, reciting the passage in her gliding East Texas accent. It was during a long, hard drug investigation that I'd been held prisoner by Evangeline Roy and her 2 sons, the leaders of a cult-like ring of meth dealers. Several people had died, including a member of my own team, and I'd managed to survive, but just barely. The injury to my leg had curtailed, maybe forever, my ability to run. the key to my sanity. Until my injury, I'd run faithfully every day of my life through other hurts, fevers, sprains, burns. I ran to keep the internal destructive forces at bay, the cali-headed, bile-throated, hatchet-tongued impulses that threatened hourly to overcome every peaceful, balanced, orderly event in my life. I hear a restless shifting and crane my head over my shoulder to look at the guy standing behind me. He's shirtless, his shaved head glowing dully under the overhead fluorescent lights, bulging pectoral muscles inked with a large skull entwined with snakes, twitching impatiently. I've been told he's a master at what he's about to do. I haven't got all day, he warns me, grabbing hold of one of my ankles. Yeah, I say, just give me one more minute, please. I'm pathetic, cowardly. You and no one else brought yourself to this, I think. The worst part of not being able to run, though, has been the loss of connection to my Uncle Benny, my father's brother, and a respected homicide cop with the 94th Police Precinct in Brooklyn. The total and absolute evaporation of his voice, his wisdom, his warnings and admonitions from my head. When I run, I hear him as clearly as though he was racing alongside me, breathing into my ear. The fact that he's been dead for several years has not vanquished my certainty that he's out there waiting to talk to me. If only I could unleash my mind to channel him.
Thank you so much for that wonderful reading. Our next, logistically, turn off camera first. I don't know. This is this is an amazing first for me, talking to so many wonderful writers. So our next author is Laurie R. King. She is the New York Times best-selling writer of between 27 and 40 books, as we discussed previously, including the Mary Russell Sherlock Holmes story, the only writer probably to have both an Edgar and an honorary doctorate in theology. In this installment, Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes turned the Riviera upside down to crack their most captivating case. And I should note that the next Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes book is Castle Shade, and it's out on June 8th. And I also want to mention she is one of bookseller Anne McMahon's favorites. She's often on the recommendation shelf of her. So I welcome Laurie R. King.
Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, Boswell, and thank you everybody who's coming by, and thank you for the other people on the, I mean, I'm just full of thanks. And the only way it could be better is if we could actually be there and breathe on each other and shake each other's hands. So let's take it as done. So I'm going to read you a section of Riviera Gold that, because I get tired of reading the beginning, it's in there a bit. Mary Russell and her partner husband, Sherlock Holmes, head to the Riviera in search of his longtime housekeeper turned, or landlady turned housekeeper, Mrs. Hudson, who it turns out has a very racy past. There's two scenes in this, and in the first one, Mrs. Hudson, Clarissa, is talking to her friend, Lily Langtry. And in the second scene, it's Russell and Holmes. Lily says, "You're far too forgiving, Clarissa. 40 odd years of having that man looking over your shoulder, and not even the benefits of marriage." Benefits? Could you imagine being married to the man? Mary Russell is a brave young woman. And it was 44 years, well, minus his absences. Ah, those absences. Such mischief we all got up to when you had the freedom to roam. We did have fun, didn't we? Oh, Clarissa, even if we only get up to old woman mischief, it's going to be good to have you back. Chapter 12. Materializing out of nowhere was a traditional part of the Sherlock Holmes mystique. However, I knew his methods all too well, and it did not take long to put the pieces together. My telegrams had not summoned him into a mad airplane dash from out of a distant Romanian mountain. nor had his spymaster brother been keeping tabs on me. Holmes had not noted the distinctive soil on a passing shoe and matched it with the hair from a Gibraltar ape and a flower known only in Monaco. None of those things had been required because he was already here. I told him 3 weeks ago in Venice how long it would, where the Stella Maris was going and approximately how long it would take. He knew back in May that his longtime housekeeper was thinking of heading to Monte Carlo. It was no great leap to know that I would, finding myself on the Riviera, seek her out. All he had to do was wait in a place near the well-beaten path. Although that did leave the question of why. But I started with his cufflinks. Really, Holmes, diamonds? He raised one wrist to give the garish object an approving look. Hideous, aren't they? The suit is nice, though, Italian. I had it made as I passed through Rome. One did not pass through Rome on the way from Romania to Monaco or even from Venice, but I ignored the blatant red herring. I see you decided to keep the mustache. I did shave it upon leaving Venice, but I let it grow again before I came here. It seemed to go with the diamonds. His fingers came up to smooth the narrow line on his upper lip. A most precise decoration, I said, though not as carefully engineered as one I saw last night near Antibes. Ah, you have met Count Vasilev. God, the man's omniscience could be irritating. I gave up and went for straight interrogation. How long have you been here, Holmes? Only a day or two. How many? 2, he admitted, and a half. Have you found Mrs. Hudson? I've seen her. But you don't know where she's living? I was surprised. After 2 days, I'd have thought Holmes would not only have located her house, but her maid, her hairdresser, and her bank manager as well. Perhaps things work differently in Monaco. And perhaps asking at the local police station wouldn't have led me to her after all. Not yet. Either she has been remarkably inconspicuous, or the Monegasques I have spoken with have been singularly close-mouthed. She is definitely here. I have seen her 3 times, although each time she's been going somewhere other than home. And before you ask, no, we have not spoken. I do not believe she has spotted me. You're spying on her? I would not put it that way precisely. How would you put it? I am attempting to confirm that the agreement I reached with her long ago still stands. That agreement had amounted to a sort of lifetime parole. She could remain in England, but only under his roof, living a life of obedience and morality. You don't trust her? Should I?
Unmute. Thank you so much for that wonderful read. We will now introduce Rosalie Knecht, who is I'm going to bring her up right now. Rosalie Knecht is a New York-based writer whose first book in her series was Who is Vera Kelly, which was, as I mentioned to her enthusiastically, was on bookseller Jen Steele's rec shelf for a good year, in addition to Relief Map. She's the translator of Cesar Ares, and I apologize for pronunciation. I'm so sorry. I'm terrible at these things. The Seamstress and a Woodland Center for Fiction Emerging Writer Fellow. Her, in her new book, Knecht's recently out of the spy game heroine finds herself traveling from Brooklyn to a sprawling countryside estate in the Caribbean in her first case as a private investigator. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. I have someone logged in as an audience member in the same room with me, so I'm getting this from 2 angles. I just want to say thank you so much to the Edgar Awards, the awards committee, to everybody involved with this whole thing, and to Boswell Books and Daniel in particular, and Kathy Doneman for helping to set all of this up. It's been an honor to be nominated and just really fun to be part of this process. There will be a third, this is the book, there will be a third one out next year, but it's untitled as yet, but it will be out in June 2022. And you know what, Daniel gave us a chance to update our bios, and I said, no, nothing's changed. But in fact, I live in New Jersey now, which is sort of the inevitable trajectory. No longer a New York-based writer, representing North Jersey now. So I'm just going to read from the beginning of the book. This is chapter 1. The morning after Jane left me, I woke in a Russian diner that overlooked the boardwalk at Brighton Beach, sitting upright in the corner of a booth. I had always been grateful for an all-night restaurant. A waitress with red cheeks was refilling a cup of coffee in front of me and rotating the plate with its scraps of corned beef, clearing her throat politely. I sat up and thanked her. Through the fogged glass, I could see the gray ocean, pale and soft, meeting a paler sky, and down the beach, the wonder wheel at Coney Island was coming out of the pre-dawn dark. I put my hand over the mug and the waitress moved away. By my watch, it was 6:40 in the morning, which meant that it was almost 24 hours now since things had begun to go wrong. Jane had said, I'm tired of waiting for you to want me here. She was standing in the hallway between my bedroom and the second floor bathroom, holding the powder pink bag with her makeup and toothbrush in it, wearing my dressing gown. I don't have to move in, but you hardly talk to me. I talk to you. About what? About nothing. I turn around and you've left the room. I talk to you. You say clever things, and when I try to answer you seriously, you make clever jokes. You can move in then, I said, becoming desperate. You can move in. I've been stupid. You know I can't. You would make me miserable. She waved her hand toward the hall, the stairs. You practically faint when I leave my shoes on the rug. She brushed past me to my room. I leaned in the doorway and watched her getting dressed. Don't go, I said. I set it into my cupped hand. She put her hand on my shoulder. You're a nice girl, Vera, she said, but you're impossible. Jane was noisy and hot with a bright face, and after she left, the house felt like a meat locker despite the August weather. I went for a long, blurry walk. When I got home, I stood in the kitchen for 15 minutes, looking at the wall clock, and then had a whiskey and sat in the garden. The roses were blooming for the second time that year. They were yellow washed with pink, like sherbet melting in a bowl of punch. The starling who lived under the eaves of the shed came out to scream at me. He thought the yard was his. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. It was time to go to work. I was one of the film editors for the news broadcast of the WKNY station near the Battery. I started leaking tears on the Q train over the river because the view was too big and I could see the trees on Governor's Island fizzing and dark in the sun. The summer would be over soon. I made it to my break before I called her. She had a telephone in her office at Brooklyn College and she would have just finished her afternoon romantic poetry class. It rang twice and she picked up. Jane, I said, I think this is a mistake. I'll make it up to you. Vera, it's too late. All right, I'm sorry. What do you mean? I was alone in the editing room and I was keeping my voice low. George Kepler must have been listening from the switchboard or patched in from another office. Later, I wondered if he had been listening to my calls for months, ever since he had cornered me at the bar where the editors and runners went after the evening broadcast, and I pushed him off, laughing. What do you mean it's too late? I said. Is there someone else? She said nothing. Jane, is there? There is? I didn't plan it this way. I hung up and tried not to fall apart. My eyes were rattling in my head. I went to the stairwell and smoked a cigarette and then another. I returned to the editing room. My supervisor, Mr. Anderson, was there, standing with George Kepler, who looked very pleased. Vera, I need to speak with you, Mr. Anderson said, and turned to indicate his office with a sweep of his hand, as if we were going to the theater together. What for? I said. George Kepler turned and walked away. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. Privately, Mr. Anderson said. He shut the door behind us and pointed to a chair. His windows looked out on a post office lot with a huge doorway to an underground garage where fleets of mail trucks came and went in the gloom. Sunlight never touched the street in this part of town. There's a character clause in your employment contract, he said. He looked at me as if I should grasp his meaning, and then I did. A mask descended. I tried to keep my voice calm. Can you make yourself clear? I said. I have a lot of work to do. No, you don't, he said. You're in violation of your employment contract. We can't keep people on staff who live that way. He pushed back from his desk and began searching in his coat pocket for his matches. His color was rising, and he wouldn't look at me. I told them that you would be a problem, he said, when they first promoted you from the floor. It was obvious to anyone with eyes. They didn't listen to me. He found the matches. We'll mail you your last check.
Thank you so much for that wonderful reading. Our next author is Sara Perezki, who is going to start her video now. Sara Perezki is Chicago-based, unless she moved to Indiana during this last year. The New York Times bestselling author of 22 novels, including the renowned the Wachowski series. She is one of only 4 living writers to have received both a Grand Master Award from Mystery Writers of America and the Cartier Diamond Dagger from the Crime Writers Association of Great Britain. She's also appeared at Boswell once and at the UWM Library and a posted event by Boswell, 2 of our favorite events that we've ever done. In Deadland, she continues the legendary series with a story that scrapes Chicago's seedy underbelly. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Daniel. I love Boswell books. I even love Milwaukee. It's got a beautiful lakefront, and I love sitting in the patio of the museum there and watching the sails spin around before they get ready to close the doors. Thank you also to Kathy Daneman and to Marjorie Flax for making all of this happen. Sue Grafton and I published our first books in the same year, and our careers were very much twined together. Sue once said that she thought in a previous life we must have been conjoint twins because so many of the details, both of our lives and of our books, were so similar. And it's hard to be nominated for an award in the name of an old friend and comrade who's no longer with us, but I'm very honored by the nomination. Vera Warshawski was born and bred on Chicago's southeast side. She grew up in a part of the city that truly exemplifies the mean streets. They are even meaner now than they were when she was a child because we've lost the steel mills that used to provide work to over 40,000 people who lived in that community and who are now sadly unemployed. I, however, come from Kansas. I grew up in rural Kansas. Rural is one of the hardest words in the English language to say. And even though Chicago has been my home for 50 years now, which is a sort of a horrifying number to count when you realize I was an adult when I moved here, nonetheless, the prairies, that sort of almost melancholy landscape, play a big role in my development, in my imagination, and Deadland is the 4th of my works to be partly or wholly set in those prairies. The book has a complicated plot. I'm not going to try to summarize it, but because it has been out and available for over a year now, I don't think it's a spoiler to read from the ending. The book focuses in part on the life of a singer-songwriter named Lydia Zamir, whose life was upended when her lover was killed in one of the senseless mass shootings that are part of the American landscape. She's had a very rocky ride and has finally emerged from a period of muteness brought on by the horrors that she witnessed to a sort of fragile sense of herself returning as a singer. She's living with some old friends and mentors in a sort of a Laura Ingalls Wilder underground prairie house out in the middle of Kansas. And she puts on essentially a private concert. And VI is one of about a dozen people who's there on this fall day to listen to Lydia. We sat on blankets in the prairie plants, far enough from the dugout patio that we wouldn't seem threatening. Lydia came out the front door, one hand on Coop's arm, the other holding a guitar. She'd gained weight. Her hair had recovered its gloss. She sat on a chair, and Bear, the dog, planted himself in front of her. She played to herself for a time, letting the guitar follow the sound of the wind. We all listened quietly. No applause, no making moves or sounds that might be seen as boundary violations. After half an hour or so, she eased into song. Her voice was still rusty, and she couldn't find a true pitch, but the broken sound made the music more deeply moving. Oh, the art of loving is the art of death. Love's opposite isn't hate, not hate. Love's opposite is lonesome, one lone swan. Love gets us through those lonely times. Hate keeps us up all night. A swan whose lover dies is one lone swan. A swan whose lover dies still lives in love that gets her through the night. Thank you very much.
Up to the part of the evening where I am playing the recording from Ilaria Tuti, and many things can go wrong with sharing a recording. So I thank you in advance for bearing with me. I would like to introduce the author first. Italian author Ilaria Tuti has a degree in economics, a passion for painting, and freelances for a small independent publisher in her spare time. She won the Gran Giallo, terrible pronunciation, Città de Cattolica Literary Prize for her short story, The Pagan Child. Flowers Over the Inferno was her debut novel, and she followed that up with her new Edgar Award nominated second book, which features Superintendent Teresa Battaglia. So let's see how this goes. Share computer sound, and here we go.
Hello, I'm very happy and thrilled to be here with you, even if only with a recorded video. Thank you very much for the invitation and congratulations to the other nominees. Now I'm reading some passages from my novel, The Sleeping Nymph, to introduce you the protagonist, Superintendent Teresa Battaglia. She is almost 60s, she is overweight, she is suffering diabetes and also Alzheimer's, but above all, she's an extraordinary woman and a profiler. Teresa closed her diary, her head resting against the window of the office she shared with Marini. She had watched him walk away in the darkness. He's running from something. The kid had settled into a new life, but something was stalking him. Even his body had changed over the past few weeks. It was leaner, more strained, more alert, restless. They had something in common, Marini and her. They both kept secrets. She pushed the arms of her glasses between her lips and stared out into the darkness, pierced here and there by street lamps and headlights. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the darkness. The bangle on her wrist tinkled. It was a simple silver band with an inscription. Your name is Teresa Battaglia. Her doctor's mobile phone number followed, not a husband's, nor a son's, nor a relative's. It was a message she had left for herself. She, who had never needed anyone to rescue her. She drew the curtains over the darkness outside, and it was like shaking off a torpor that had weighed on her body and her mind. Her work desk consists of a polished surface with a computer screen and a keyboard. Over the past few months, he had changed with her, adapting itself to a world in which Teresa had had no choice but to reshape herself into a more methodical, more reflective, perhaps even a more disciplined form. She sat down and placed her diary on the desk. She retrieved the key to the filing cabinet from under a keyboard, opened one of the drawers and looked inside. It was like setting a box of fireflies free, dozens of numbered post-it notes like colorful wings that flutter to the touch and carry useful information. Yellow, for work-related notes, what their job was, how to switch a computer on, how to turn it off, how to use the telephone, how to call a taxi, the name of the person she shared an office with. Green, for her personal life and the necessary rituals of diabetes. The message on note number 1 was a troubling reminder. Check your bracelet. These were her clues through a daily path that might at any moment turn unfamiliar and impenetrable. Thank you very much. Bye.
I have no idea if that worked, but I hope it did because it was a lovely reading. So with that said, we're going to stay in Italy for our next author. James W. Ziskin is the author of the Ellie Stone Mysteries, winner of the Anthony Award for Best Paperback Original and the McCavity Award for Best Historical Novel, which is the Sue Fader Memorial Award. He has also been a finalist, the Edgar, Barry, and Lefty Awards. His latest is a 1960s era locked room mystery that takes Ellie Stone to Florence, Italy, an idyllic setting where a new case has sinister undertones. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. First of all, I'd just like to say how honored I am to be here and to be nominated alongside Kathleen, Laurie, Rosalie, Sara, and Ilaria. It's really an honor, and it was such a huge surprise. I want to thank Daniel and Boswell Books, obviously Kathy Daneman and MWA and Marjorie Flax for everything they've done. So as Daniel said, this book takes place in Italy in 1963 in September, shortly before obviously the JFK assassination. But Ellie Stone is in Italy for a symposium honoring her late father, who was an Italian scholar, Italian professor. So, but when she arrives, the man who has invited her is found dead in the Arno River. And so I'm going to read from two scenes very near the beginning of the story, where Ellie runs into a couple of Americans on the Ponte Vecchio, and then a few hours later, when she goes to dinner with the people who are left from the symposium for her first, like one of her first dinners in Florence. And at the end of that evening, everyone else kind of wanders off, and she's left with one particular one of the professors. So I'll read from the story now. "Excusey me," said a middle-aged lady standing in front of me in a bright sundress. American. A sunburned baby Huey of a man stood behind her. Smile at the ready. "Tu fare foto noi per piacere? Would you be so kind to snap a picture of my husband and me?" "Of course," I said. She seemed thrilled that I spoke English, introduced herself as Millie Steuben and her husband, Big Bob, from Lebanon, Kansas. That's for you, Sara. Under cross-examination, I gave my name and city of origin. "We saw you this morning in the breakfast room at the hotel," she said. "Are you staying at Albergo Bardi as well? We're in room 25. How about you?" 41, I said. Big Bob stepped forward, grabbed my hand with both mitts, and commenced pumping vigorously. He pronounced himself happy to meet another American, even if I was from New York. Ha ha. I took the camera from Millie and focused on the couple. Not much that I could do beyond that. It wasn't a magic camera. Millie and Bob were satisfied all the same and invited me and my husband, surely I was married, to visit them in Kansas if ever we were in the neighborhood. Or stop by our room anytime if you're missing some American company. Number 25. Now later that evening. And so I was left alone with Franco, a hungry-looking man of 40 or so, who, once inebriated, had no shame when it came to suffering repeated rejections. While proper and well-behaved enough sober, now he had one thing on his mind, viz. How to separate me from my virtue, or more precisely, my skirt and my blouse. With no warning and apropos of nothing, he covered my hand with his, as if to prevent my escape. He leaned closer to me and bore his stare into my eyes like some kind of Svengali trying to mesmerize a young lovely. I tugged a couple of times, attempting to reclaim my hand, but he held on fast. "Quanto sei bella, Eleonora," he cooed in a soft baritone. I gave another yank, stuck like glue. It's Ellie, please. At length, satisfied that his spell had been cast and I was in his thrall, he released me from his grip and sat back in his chair. Then he smiled, bearing a line of bright white teeth. To be sure, Franco had some 5 o'clock shadow charm, but he wasn't winning me over. His unwelcome courting, ever intensifying with the effect of wine, struck me as somehow robotic, like a male pigeon, bobbing and dancing around an indifferent female. I cursed myself again for the earlier touch of his arm. When would I learn that subtlety was far too subtle for men to grasp, at least where women and sex were concerned? A half hour later, Franco had scraped the last smudges of budino from the dessert dish, and long since he'd slurped his dregs of cafe ristretto from its cup. The world-weary waiter appeared above us and tapped his wristwatch, indicating he'd rather we continue our mating rituals somewhere elsewhere, so he could retire for the night. Franco settled the bill with a wad of lire, and then lit a cigarette and held the door for me. Outside on the street, I thanked him for the dinner. Then he invited me back to my own hotel room, per un drink. I declined, citing the early hour of the next morning's seminar. As we strolled back to Albergo Bardi, Franco kept up the pressure anyway. He begged, as only Italian men can do, with an insistent smile and imploring hands clasped together as if praying for divine intervention. Dai, Ellie, un piccolo drink. He dragged out the pronunciation of the 2 L's of my name in typical Italian fashion. The overwhelming impression was that of being propositioned by a spoiled child who would throw himself on the ground, kicking and screaming if he didn't get his way. We arrived at the Bardi, and I held out a hand for shaking purposes, but Franco lunged for my lips instead. I recoiled, lost my footing, and we tumbled as one to the paving stones, with my posterior cushioning the fall for both of us. Uffa, he exclaimed as I shoved him off my person. He rolled into the gutter and, groaning, examined the skin palms of his hands. Porca miseria, mi sono fatto male. I propped myself up on my elbows and rubbed my smarting backside. He'd hurt himself? What about me? I struggled to my feet and stood over him. He looked up at me with pathetic cow eyes and begged me to take pity on him and invite him up to my room. I sensed the path of least resistance was to give in to his charms. I'd led him on after all, so it only seemed fair to let him have what he wanted. Wait here for 5 minutes, I said, bending to whisper in his ear. Then come up to room 25. He smiled, and I swear, would have rubbed his hands together in wicked delight if he hadn't just scraped them raw on the pavement. I straightened my skirt, stepped over him, and pushed through the door into the hotel. I escaped to my room, number 41, and wondered how Big Bob Steuben would react to Franco's amorous rapping at his door after midnight.
Thank you so much. So we have a few questions in from varied sources. I think the best way is for, I think almost all the questions are going to be directed at everybody. So I would suggest that we just keep to that order, so we're not talking over people, and just, in that alphabetical order, if you can remember it. So the first one was from a very fine writer, said, why don't we all talk about what we're working on now? So Kathleen, would you like to go first?
Sure, yeah, I appreciate the question. I am now jumping genres again, and I'm working on an international spy thriller based in part, very loosely, on my experiences working as a contractor for the Department of Defense in the former Soviet Union. And it takes place during the fall. It's a year after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It takes place in Belarus in 1990, a few years after Chernobyl. And the main protagonist is female, and she's there as a young CIA agent. And so that's what I'm working on now, spy thriller.
I've got a new one coming out in June, which is Russell and Holmes go to Transylvania and may or may not meet vampires. But I'm now working on, because the Russell books so often require travel, and travel has been just a little difficult the last year. I'm doing a whether it's a first of a series or a standalone, I haven't decided, but it's a cold case one that has part of it set in the 60s and 70s. So I get to explore my hippie past.
It's funny that there's 3 Ks in a row. I really had to sing the alphabet song to myself at the beginning to find out which was first. I'm just finishing up the third in the Vera Kelly trilogy, which will be the last one. I'm kind of in edits now, and it'll be out in June next year. And then I'm also working on something unrelated and not a genre thing that I'm sort of was fun to get started on after I spent a long time with Vera Kelly. At this point, I started the first book 8 years ago, so I've been in this world for a while. So that is I'm not going to describe it, and it is untitled as yet. So and voila, okay, that's it.
The mystery project. Yes. Sure.
I had an interesting time writing some short story for the MWA anthology that S.J. Roseanne is editing this time around, exploring some of the issues that are kind of bedeviling me in my own life over the many years of my life, and it's in a way not a mystery at all. In fact, I don't think I really do write mysteries. I think I write sort of shaggy dog stories that have so many components to them that the mystery is that whether the reader will actually make it to the end in a state of utter confusion or not.
James?
I've recently finished a new novel outside the Ellie Stone series. It's a historical thriller set in India in 1975 during the emergency, which was a period when Indira Gandhi was the prime minister, and she declared a domestic emergency and limited, curtailed civil liberties and freedom of the press, and threw her political opponents in jail. My story concerns an young American journalist. For a change, it's a male protagonist in my books, who just recently arrives in India for a long-term assignment, just as the emergency is declared. So I describe it as Gatsby meets Graham Greene on the subcontinent. And if that sounds a bit presumptuous, I apologize. But if I'm gonna compare myself or try to emulate anyone, why not someone like Graham Greene or Scott Fitzgerald? So that's just out on submission now from my agent. So it doesn't have a home yet.
Any publishers in the audience, now you know. So I had a wonderful question about advice to a young or a new writer, or if you had a piece of advice to give that writer, maybe something that you wish somebody had told you, maybe something that you're glad they didn't tell you, I don't know. So Kathleen, do you have something any sort of answer to that?
I think for a new writer, it's important not to compare yourself, especially in terms of output, to other writers. Every writer works in their own individual way. Some people are able to have an enormous output of words and pages per day. Other people work much more slowly. I'm a slow writer, very slow writer. I would say to give yourself as much time as needed to finish your project, whether it takes 1 year or 5 years, to let it grow organically and to try to resist the impulse to compare yourself in terms of output to another writer. That would be, I think, my most important bit of advice.
And I'm actually the perfect person to have asked that question of, because I can say, get one of these, because Jim Ziskin is in it, and it has everyone in it. From what I had such a good time on is arranging the articles that we had people write, so that you have Jeff Deaver on why you must outline, followed by Lee Child, never outline.
Well, yes, I mean, the editor of a compendium of how to do it is hard to follow on this subject, but I have two very mundane pieces of advice. One is that you can actually get a tremendous amount done in just a few hours a week if you are able to set things up so that you have those few hours consistently. I think a book is such a daunting prospect that we feel like we would have to somehow, I don't know, inherit millions and clear our schedules for a year, and that's not the case. It's at least for, it depends on your style, for your way of working, but I think you can get pretty far with just the little crevices in your schedule if it's consistent, which I think is true of a lot of practices actually in your life. And relatedly, I think we often get invested in the idea of writers who only write, and first of all, there aren't that many of them. Practically everybody has other jobs. And secondly, I really think that's actually a strength and a way that you can kind of make your life and your work richer. I don't think it's a drawback. I'm a social worker and therapist in addition to writing, and I wouldn't give that up even if I did inherit millions. So, well, you know what, I wouldn't, let me not go that far. But and my point is it makes your life bigger. It can make your life bigger and broader if you're doing work that you care about and that's stimulating for you, in addition to writing that's perhaps unrelated to writing. That's my second piece.
I think Kathleen's advice was great. I really second it. I also would urge people, wherever they are in their career, to take more chances. It's one of my handicaps, that I'm nervous. I'm not a big risk taker, and I wish I were. I wish I would jump off the high dive more readily in my work. So I urge everyone to do what I don't do, which sounds like James, for instance, or Kathleen and Rosalie are all trying new things all the time, which is just great. I was listening to I listen to BBC radio a lot, and listening to a sort of an office comedy set in an office the other day on people trying to improve themselves. And one of the women said that there were only 3 things that you could do to improve yourself, or to get through hard times, really, not to improve yourself. Take a nap, take a walk, and drink a glass of water. So as I've been struggling to finish a book, which is now long overdue, I take a nap, and then I need to take a walk. And then after the walk, I need to drink a glass of water. And by then I'm tired again and ready for another nap.
I would offer, write what you want to read. People used to say, write what you know, but I don't. If I wrote what I knew, I'd run out of ideas pretty quickly. So write what you want to read. Also, challenge every word. I really think it's important for a writer to care about language. So those are my, two biggest. And keep writing. Write another one when you're done. Don't sit there and admire it forever. Just write another one.
We had a follow-up question on your last answer, which was, are you sharing the title of that book on submission, or the working title?
Mine, are you asking, Daniel? Yeah, the working title is Bombay Monsoon. And it takes place during monsoon season, and there's a lot of rain. And I love putting weather in my books. It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, so my next question was what's everybody's favorite weather for the book? But I'm not going to ask that. Interesting. I actually really love place, and you all have very distinctive places. And I'm curious as to how you determine your places, and also if you were going to set a book in another place, like what's your dream place to set it? Or would you just do what you're doing now? Kathleen, do you have an answer? You're like, what question is that?
Well, so the historical fiction was kind of all over the place. I had lived and worked in New York for 20 years. And when I came back to Dallas, Texas, where I lived as a child, it felt familiar and strange at the same time. So I was able to channel my own experiences of moving back to Texas after being in New York into the work. I think, maybe I'd love to write about the British Isles, maybe Scotland. I haven't tackled that yet, but I feel a very deep, profound connection to that. And so maybe, maybe sometime in the future, I'll be writing about Scotland.
Like I said, I kind of need to be able to travel, but on the books for research purposes, I would like to do a Paris book. The characters need to go through Paris. I also need to do a London book. But for the U.S. side of things, I would love to do a thing set down at the place in oh my God, I'm blanking the name of it. Southern California, the Hearst Castle in San Simeon. Mostly because if I could talk my way into doing a residence, I would think that would be just such fun. So that's my fantasy.
That would be the ideal. I have to agree with Laurie. And actually, the book that the third book in the Vera Kelly trilogy that I'm just finishing up, there is an extremely huge, elaborate Californian mansion in it that I sort of had the Hearst Castle in my mind because I visited there one time, and it makes an impression. Like, it really makes an impression. So yes, that would be a residency program there. They don't seem like they're doing much for the community, so they might as well. They've got a lot of guest houses. I feel like they could put people in them. But yeah, I tend to write. I tend to set things places that I have lived in, often not until after I've left them, but I had a couple of books set in New York while I was living there, and actually the standalone novel, non-mystery novel that I'm working on now is actually set in North Jersey, so that's new ground that I'm trying. But I cannot call North Jersey a fantasy location. I think if I was making a pitch for somebody to send me someplace for novel research, I would love to go to Puerto Rico again. I went a few years ago, and then Hurricane Maria hit, and I haven't been able, other circumstances have intervened, and I haven't been able to go back. But just such a wonderful, just like a really lovely place that I would love to spend more time in and get to know more. Modest.
Stuart Kaminsky of blessed memory, who was one of the mentors who helped me get started many, many years ago, wrote a series of police procedurals set in Moscow. And this was at the height of the Cold War, and he was not able to get permission to travel there. But his research was so impeccable that when the wall came down, the Soviet Union sort of disintegrated, and he finally went to Moscow, the mayor presented him with a key to the city because they were so impressed. He had written about it as if he were a native. And I'm impressed too. I really have to be there and experience it to feel it well enough to write about it. excuse me, I worked in insurance for a number of years and wrote my first books while I was working full-time in insurance. And I sort of agree with Rosalie, but at the same time, now that I'm in my 70s and with limited energy, I don't think much as an outside job might keep me sane, or I wouldn't have the stamina to do both anymore. But insurance, the underwriting of the higher levels of insurance, which affects big corporations, is all done out of the London office, out of the Lloyd's office. And I had a great story set in that office. And then I realized, excuse me, to me personally, one of the big drawbacks of the Robert Parker series was the book that he set in London, where he and the guy whose name I'm blanking on start shooting it up in London parks. And I thought, you cannot write a novel set in a city, in a country where you really don't understand the power relationships. I mean, a crime novel, you don't understand the power relationships. You don't understand the intricacies of local law enforcement. And so I kind of backed away from that. My husband had already given the book a title, Dead in the Box, because the underwriters call where they sit the box. And they like to get, they don't like to get drunk. They like to go out and drink a lot at lunch and inveigh against the laziness of the working man while they're drinking 3 bottles of claret and coming back 4 hours later. And we used to see the side effects, the after effects of these drunken lunches as we were kind of mopping up pieces at CNA Insurance in Chicago. Anyway, perfect setting for those who have more courage than I do.
In my books, Daniel, the Ellie Stone books, at least, she's based in a small, a town in upstate New York. And I wanted to avoid Cabot Cove syndrome, too many murders in a small town. So I've moved her around quite a bit, including in this last installment, she's in Florence, in Italy. But in other books, I've long wanted to write a book set in Pompeii, just as Vesuvius erupts. I think that would be really interesting.
And wasn't there just a new discovery in Pompeii too? So
well, they're constantly digging up things, but it's just such a haunting place and remarkably preserved, obviously, once they dig things up and expose them. But just, the horror of the people who died beneath the ashes, and their shapes were preserved, even if everything else is gone. Yeah.
Well, get started on that one. So, because we all want to read it. Congratulations to everybody. Looking forward to the ceremony and looking forward to your next books. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good luck, everyone.
Best to everyone. Yeah.